so many of you were able to make this meeting. Again, this is one of 4 meetings that we are holding this week, one for each building. The beginning of the meeting, the first 30 minutes or so, as I give everyone an overview, is a repetition. So for those of you who were able to be in attendance last evening, let me warn you, you're going to hear the same information that you heard at last evening's meeting as well. And if you attend either the high school or the Erdenheim meetings, you're going to hear it tomorrow night and Thursday night as well. So I apologize for the repetition, but I do want to make sure that every single group hears the very important information that we had in the beginning. So for those of you who may have been in attendance last evening, if you don't want to pay attention during the first 30 minutes or so, feel free to stop the video so we can't see you and you can go do some other things. But hopefully during the breakout sessions, there will be some interesting conversation and discussion. So after I kind of give an overview to everyone, I'm going to assign you into a breakout room where you will have the opportunity with a much smaller group of individuals to be able to talk, to raise concerns, have a little bit of a discussion. And then I'm going to ask if one person in the breakout room can be a scribe and also can report out. I'm going to ask you to report out on some of the top considerations that came up in your breakout room, whether they were questions, concerns, or things that you all noted that you wish to let us all know about. So hopefully we can get through those. I'm going to try to limit the time a little bit on the breakout rooms. So I'm going to ask you, as I said, to please only give about 2 or 3 of the top either questions, concerns, or issues that you discussed, because it looks like, fortunately, we've got a very nice large group. We have over 130 people so far. So that means we're probably going to have around 13 or more breakout rooms, and to get through them all and hear everyone's questions and concerns, we want to make sure that we limit those. My guess is, as we saw last evening, that a lot of you are going to have similar concerns, issues, questions as other breakout rooms as well. So if that's the case and you hear something being asked and answered, please don't repeat it. Again, that'll help us get to every single one of the breakout rooms. For parents who have a special education student, I do want to let you know that Dr. Johnston and I are working on also scheduling some special sessions for the parents of our special education students as well, because we know that you may have some very specific issues regarding your children that you would like to have considered as well. So we want to give you that opportunity within the next week or so. I also want to remind everybody, we had a huge response to our thought exchange survey that we issued to parents, where we asked for your input about virtual instruction over the past several weeks. We also administered surveys to all of our staff members by building in order to get their feedback about what they found challenging and what worked for them. And we're going to collate all of these results in order to be able to better assess the work that we did when we had to shut down in March. As I know all of you are very much aware, this was a new situation for all of us. We certainly tried very, very hard. I think our teachers did a phenomenal job of trying to allow everyone to learn under some very challenging conditions, but there's always something more that we can learn in terms of reflecting on how that went. And so we're going to be looking at the thought exchange results. We had over 900 people who responded to the thought exchange forum, and we're going to be sharing those results out with everyone, and again, using those results internally along with our teacher feedback. In the event at some time in the future that we have to go back to 100% virtual instruction, then we can use those results to hopefully improve upon what we did. Of course, we all hope that will not be the case, But given what we are seeing in the news lately about the number of cases increasing, obviously we all have concerns and we don't know what the future will hold. I will tell you that our goal for September, along with my colleagues in other districts in Montgomery County, as well as other counties in the area, all of us have the same goal, and that is to get 100% of our students back into school 100% of the time. So for now, that is what we are all working towards. I don't know if many of you saw that there was information and guidelines that came out today from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which I referenced in last night's meeting, that also talks about that should be the goal for all schools to reopen. And the major reason for that is not only do we know that for some children there may have been academic regression as the result of the fact that learning was not the same as it typically is in an in-school environment, but we also know that students have suffered from social isolation as well. The lack of social connections with their peers, with their friends, with their teachers has really been a struggle for many children and for our staff members as well. So we know everyone is anxious to get back to try to repair some of the experiences that were negative for children during this period of time. We also know that as a result of simply being scared about the pandemic and the anxieties that families have felt due to the many things resulting from the pandemic, whether it's unemployment, lack of jobs, issues with food distribution, many things that have resulted. And of course, most importantly, the fear of contracting a very deadly disease can make children as well as adults very anxious during this period of time. That, of course, coupled with national events that have occurred over the period of time since Memorial Day, have also created some trauma and undue stress on many of our students and our families. So coming back is going to be challenging because our first obligation is going to be able to, or is going to require us to address all of these issues. Before children can really pay attention in algebra class, they have to know that they are being supported and cared for, and that being in school is going to be a safe and secure environment for them. And while there's always risk, and we cannot guarantee that there won't be any risk in returning to school for either our staff or students, our role is going to be to try to mitigate that risk as best we can, knowing that we can't fully eliminate that risk. So I do want to reassure everyone that in order to begin the preparations for returning to school, myself, my colleagues throughout the county, and my colleagues in Bucks County, Chester County, and Delaware County, we've all been looking at many documents which have provided guidance to us, not the least of which has come from Montgomery County. But we've all looked at the guidance that has been issued by the county health departments in each of our counties. We are looking at state documents. The Pennsylvania Department of Education has come out with guidance from a research-based company called Mathematica, which is funded through the Regional Education Laboratory, also known as McCrell. We've looked at documents from other states. We've looked at, as I referenced, the American Academy of Pediatrics. And we've also had group meetings across the state with educators involved in various state organizations, such as our State Teachers Association, PSEA, our School Administrators Association, our Secondary and Elementary Principals Associations, our School Business Officials, and also our School Boards Association. So collectively, all of those groups have come together in committees and have looked at the various concerns that we have about what is it we need to take into consideration. Just today, I was on a phone call with my fellow superintendents from across Montgomery County with Dr. Valerie Arkush, who shared some brand new information with us that we need to consider should there be cases that we become aware of when we get back to school, and I will share that with you shortly. So let me begin by saying that we have a lot of work to do, in particular with staff members, for two major reasons when we come back to work. One is, obviously, we know our staff members are going to have some very legitimate concerns about coming back to school and in an environment where they also may feel very threatened by the possibility of illness. And I certainly can't blame them for feeling that way. So we need to do a lot of training with our staff, and that training is going to involve precautions that we hope to be able to implement in our schools, as well as precautions we feel it's important for them to be taking as well, in order to not only protect themselves, but to protect others. We need to do training with our bus drivers, and we need to make sure that everyone is on board in terms of the precautions that we have to take around cleanliness and protecting ourselves and wearing PPE. The other area, again, that I just want to mention that we want to make sure our staff members are aware is that it's okay to take some time and to work through issues with students and to enable them to express their thoughts and concerns about what has been going on in their lives over the course of the past several months. So it may very well be that we actually suspend instruction for the first few days of school so that we can have these conversations with our students. We don't want to brush these concerns aside. We don't want to ignore these concerns, but we also want our staff to feel comfortable and confident in terms of having these conversations with students, because it's always challenging to talk about social and emotional issues with students for fear of raising things that perhaps we don't all necessarily feel comfortable talking about. But in this particular situation, that's going to be a major issue that we have to deal with as our students are coming back. As far as our parents are concerned, one thing that I mentioned last night is that you are our partners in this work. We need you to help us to keep your children home if they are not feeling well, or if a family member has become ill with the virus and there has been any risk whatsoever of exposure. We're not worried about perfect attendance, and while attendance will count, it's much more important under these conditions that if any staff member or student is exhibiting any of the symptoms, which we will publish and we have from the county health department, that they stay home. We all need to be strict about monitoring and watching out for a combination of what these symptoms are, and not sending children to school under those conditions. And we know that parents need to get to work if work opens back up, but the priority has to be on keeping sick individuals or exposed individuals at home. We also need assistance, and talk a little bit more detail about this, with your help, parents, in terms of sending the message to your children that they are better protected, as are all of us, if they are wearing masks. While we are considering the possibility that we will not mandate masks, and that is pretty much the consensus across our county in all of our schools, except in certain close quarter situations, we need you to help us impress upon children that if they still wear a mask, even when social distancing is possible, it serves as even better protection for all of us. So that's really, really critical for us all to carry that message. And you can help by purchasing masks or making masks that children can wear that are fun, that reflect who they are and their personalities. Many of those are for sale. And while we will have masks available in school, I think it's a lot more interesting for kids if they can pick their own that has a favorite color or that has something on it that is emblematic of something that they enjoy. Please, parents, also help us in terms of urging your children. We know that they're anxious to see one another and get back to school, but we have to work really hard to prevent hugging and throwing their arms around each other, as I know they are going to want to do. and we have to remind them that they must stay far apart from one another. The same kinds of physical contact that children might have had with one another in the past, we all have to be on guard against. The other area where parents can help us, while we will be offering transportation as usual to not only our own schools, but to our non-public schools as well. Parents, if you can help us out and can in any way help us reduce the number of children on our buses by driving your child if you are at home, or by encouraging your child to walk to school, even with a friend if they remain slightly apart from one another, that will help us reduce the number of children on our buses. There are only so many buses that we have, and there are only so many bus drivers. And finding bus drivers is really a challenge for us throughout this area. So in order for us to really try to spread kids apart on the bus, we need your assistance. It may have been something you wouldn't have considered in the past, but I urge you to please consider it this year to help us out. So let me just go on from here by saying that Mr. Fuller and I have had some discussions about his planning for the fall. He has been working with a leadership team of teachers at the middle school on some of the challenges that we know that we are facing. But one major decision has already been made, and I mentioned this last evening, and that is we are most likely going to keep our old Enfield school open as a 6th grade learning center. So that will enable us to reduce the number of children who will actually be in the middle school. We will move the 6th graders and their teachers over to the old Enfield, which means we're going to delay tearing down that building and having those fields available, which unfortunately were going to be primarily for middle school sports. But we really believe that keeping the building open and using it as a 6th grade center is really going to assist us with a much more important task at hand, which is to keep children apart and not have a crowded middle school during these challenging times. The new Enfield School, and I mentioned this last evening, will be open. We are on schedule in terms of completion of that building sometime this month. Our teachers have packed up their materials. They're going to be moving over to the brand new building. We've got plenty of space in that new school. So that means we certainly can use the old building, which is our intention at this point. I've been working very closely with our facilities department in terms of the ordering of much needed supplies. Dr. Yana Cohn, our assistant superintendent, and by the way, our new superintendent as of December, has been working on some grants that have been made available to school districts from both the federal government and at the state level as well, so that we can figure out exactly what types of personal protective equipment we need to order, as well as things such as wipes, defogging equipment, hand sanitizers, plexiglass barriers, and so forth. So we will have on hand, as I mentioned before, masks and face shields, particularly for teachers who will be working very closely with children, or in situations such as in science labs where students have to work together closely if they're working on a lab, potentially as well in music classrooms, because we know that singing and projecting your voice can spread saliva and germs and projectile particles outside of the mouth. So we want to make sure we have all of this protective equipment and sanitizing and cleanliness equipment on hand, so that every single day we can clean our buses after every single run, we can clean our classrooms, our cafeterias, and so forth, as well as any of our equipment. In the classroom, we fully anticipate that we are going to be able to adhere to recommended guidelines of spacing desks apart a minimum of 3 feet up to 6 feet. Those are the recommended guidelines in the American Academy of Pediatrics, every single one of our principals has measured classrooms in their schools to ensure that we are going to be able to do this. Obviously, where class sizes are smaller, it will be far easier for us to have greater distance between desks, but our goal is to have no desks that are any closer than the recommended minimum of 3 feet, and hopefully even more space between desks. Again, if we can social distance with our desks, and if students are compliant and will be wearing masks, as we strongly encourage and recommend them to be doing, we believe that in the classroom, they will be safe, which is what the science assures us. We also want to give latitude to our teachers and recommend to them that at any opportunity, especially at the beginning of the school year when the weather is good, that they can take classes outside and do work outside and get some fresh air, which is very helpful as well. In the classrooms, we encourage them, if there are ceiling fans, to put the ceiling fans on to help distribute the air, as well as to open windows on days when it is breezy, because all of these are scientifically proven methods that help distribute germs and get them out of close contact with the individuals in the classroom. We are working on plans for staggering entrances into classrooms and exits from classrooms, as well as entrance into the school building in the morning for children coming off the buses, as well as dismissal at the afternoon. We know that these are times and in between classes, as children switch from one class to another at the secondary level, these are times typically when hallways are crowded and lots of children are walking together. So the principals are committed to finding ways to stagger those dismissal times from each classroom and section so that we can be assured that children are spread apart. Similarly, we're looking at different entrances and exits to and from our buildings so that not all children are walking into the same entrance at the same time. We're looking at the cafeteria very closely and considering one of two options, either eating in classrooms or staggered lunches where we can reduce the number of students in the cafeteria. But one thing that we know is we're also looking at service in the cafeteria and what that will look like. Most of the scientific documents that we have looked at recommend that there be no buffet style or self-service in cafeterias. So we have to talk about this with our food service providers and staff and see how we can best manage that. Again, keep children from having to wait in lines, from touching things and then perhaps deciding, no thanks, I don't really want that after all, and putting it back after it's already been touched. We're trying to avoid those kinds of things from happening. We will be closing down our water fountains. So again, parents, if you wish to send a water bottle to school with your student, please do so, particularly in the beginning of the school year when it's significantly warmer. It's always great to have children well hydrated. So please feel free to send them in with a water bottle that has their name on it as well. In my conversation with Dr. Valerie Arkush today, who is the head of the Montgomery County Commissioners and is herself a physician, we had a lengthy conversation with all of our Montgomery County superintendents about our reliance on the Office of Public Health in order to assist us with the protocols that will need to be put into place if any student either has been exposed to someone with the virus or who has displayed symptoms of the virus or who is knowledgeable of a family member or a close friend with whom they've been in contact with, and whether or not they are showing symptoms or not showing symptoms, and what are the procedures that we need to put into place under those circumstances. So as I said, we are working with the county in order to finalize their guidance on what we would need to do in that eventuality that a child either tests positive or has been exposed to someone who has tested positive. Similarly with staff, if a staff has come into contact with someone who's tested positive or who themselves has tested positive, we need to have specific protocols in place. This is going to include what we will call an isolation room, an area in the middle school where we can immediately bring someone who is experiencing symptoms so that they can be apart from the rest of the population. We're also waiting for the Office of Public Health to give us guidance in terms of shutdown. When is it we need to shut down a classroom? When is it we need to notify anyone that they potentially could have been exposed to someone who either is displaying symptoms or who has in fact been exposed to someone else? We do this already with diseases such as pertussis. We normally send a letter out without identifying who the student is, notifying parents that it is possible that their student could have come into contact with someone who has displayed symptoms of pertussis. In those letters, we never reveal the identity of the child. We simply advise parents in that classroom that you should have your pediatrician or physician examine the child to ensure that they are safe. In this particular circumstance with this virus, we would do the same thing. So we do want to protect the confidentiality under the regulations pertaining to HIPAA of any staff or students. We know word travels, we know word gets out there, and we know that sometimes identities are revealed even when we as a school district pledge to try to maintain that level of confidentiality. So we just want parents to be aware that we need to do that from a legal perspective. We cannot confirm whether or not a particular child by name or a staff member has displayed any symptoms, but we will do whatever we can in conjunction with the Office of Public Health to try to take the appropriate steps once we become aware of a case like that. Mr. Ferraro and then of course Mr. Payne, who are our middle school and high school athletic directors, are working on protocols now for the resumption of athletics. It is a little ironic that when we're talking about things like social distancing in classrooms and hallways and on the buses, that we are resuming contact sports, and that the Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association is encouraging the resumption of all athletics, including at this point, contact sports. However, the essential difference is that contact sports are voluntary. Students are not required to participate. So part of the awareness that we will be doing with families, whether it's for middle school sports or high school sports, is reminding them that sports are voluntary and that you are assuming risk if you allow your child to participate, particularly in a contact sport. So we will be issuing our health and safety plan for athletics most likely sometime next week. It will be on our website after it is board approved at a board meeting next week. As far as field trips, at this point, we will not be scheduling any field trips for at least the first half of the year. As time goes on, that is something that we may have to reconsider, depending again on health and safety concerns and where we are at that point in the year with the virus. Our teachers will not be going to any out-of-district workshops. My sense from what I've been hearing is that most of the leading organizations that sponsor those kinds of workshops will continue to offer webinars or Zoom meetings such as this one, rather than asking teachers to travel outside the district. And finally, we also at this point are not planning to allow visitors into our school buildings unless it's an absolute emergency. So for example, if a parent comes to pick up a sick child who's sick for any reason whatsoever, we would most likely ask that they remain in the vestibule or outside, weather permitting. Same thing with drop-off. Parents already have the vestibule for dropping off of materials at the middle school. Once again, we'll be using that as well. We do ask that you put things like that into a plastic bag that has the child's name on it so that there's no risk of other children coming out or teachers coming out looking for materials and touching things that they're not specifically designed to have in their possession. So I think I've covered just about everything that I covered at last night's meeting with the Enfield folks. At this point, what we are going to do is, as I said, give everybody a much better opportunity in a smaller group setting in our breakout rooms to be able to have more of a small group conversation and discussion about the issues that are concerning to you or questions that you may have. Once again, I would urge you to try to hone in on maybe 2, 3, or 4 of the most essential of those so that we have an opportunity to hear from each of the breakout rooms. Please mute yourself if you haven't already. We have approximately 160 participants, so I'm going to have a large number of breakout rooms, which is terrific. And as we report out in those breakout rooms after the period of time that you have for those discussions, if your breakout room has covered something that you heard a previous breakout room say, please refrain from repeating it. There are several of us who are taking notes. Mr. Fuller is participating, so I'm sure he, like me, will also take notes, as are other administrators who are also participating in this meeting. We do want to hear from you, and we take everything that we are hearing into consideration. So while some decisions have been made, or we're leaning towards some decisions based on what other districts in the county are doing, we have not yet finalized anything. So I want to assure everyone that this input, in which you're going to have the opportunity to participate, is indeed very important to us. We heard some wonderful suggestions and ideas last night, and so we're hoping and very much looking forward to hearing more ideas this evening. So that being said, I'm going to take this opportunity to put everyone into breakout rooms. Let me remind you again, when you get into your breakout room and they are randomly assigned, if you could, as your first task of business, to please appoint someone to kind of take those notes who will also be willing to report out to the rest of us, that would really be terrific. So I'm going to assign everyone right now. And if you do not wish to participate in a breakout room, you do not have to. I would hope that you would. But again, if you feel you've heard everything you need to hear, this part of the meeting will be for the breakout rooms to have a discussion for approximately 25 minutes. And then we will all come back together to hear what that discussion was into the rooms. So I'm creating those rooms, and I'm going to open them all up.